Welcome to the final video in this lecture series. I'll be talking about strategy development. Now, the creator of community-based social marketing, Douglas Mackenzie Moore, articulated 7 strategies. I'm going to go through those. The first strategy is convenience. This makes a lot of sense. If you want people to do something, make it easy. This strategy directly targets barriers of inconvenience. I gave the example of my recycling journey in the previous video. If you watched that video, which I linked to, you would have seen it was rather inconvenient to recycle, and most people probably wouldn't have bothered. Now, convenience often involves providing improved infrastructure or making existing infrastructure easier to use. And when it's used effectively, this strategy can nudge behaviors. Let's talk about nudges. I did a study on recycling where participants used a disposable plastic cup and then had the choice between a recycling bin or a rubbish bin. When the bins were placed next to each other, the recycling rate was about 30%, not that high. But when I moved the rubbish bin further away, it was still there. It was still visible, but it was further away. The recycling rate increased to 95%. So by making the rubbish bin relatively inconvenient, the preferred behavior of recycling was dramatically increased. And there's a whole book on this idea of nudges, which a couple economists wrote. And they give a lot of examples of nudges being effectively deployed. It's an interesting read. Strategy 2 is incentives, and this is about giving people rewards for engaging in the right behavior. Often this is in the form of money. This can be problematic, though. If people already performed a behavior for personal reasons, then you start giving them money, suddenly they start to associate the behavior with the money and not with their personal reasons, maybe that they valued the behavior. The rewards can crowd out their existing motivations. And after the incentives are removed, and this happens with anyone, a lot of the motivation goes away. And you could have people who were previously motivated for personal reasons being completely unmotivated to perform the behavior. Strategy 3 is about commitment, getting people to make pledges to perform a behavior. And so pledges or commitment can encourage consistency between intentions and behaviors by getting people to commit to something for reasons that are important to them. They're more likely to act on those commitments. These are most effective if people make written commitments in public or in groups without coercion. If you coerce people, they're going to become psychologically reactive and saying, hey, don't tell me what to do. By making commitments in public or in groups, there's a bit of social pressure to follow along, and written commitments just make the commitment more tangible. Commitment should involve incremental change. If you want somebody to commit to a change, it should be something that they can reasonably do, nothing too drastic. And commitments can be most effective when people are told that they're committing to doing something that is important to them. So if you can understand their personal values, you can make that link to the commitment. Strategy 4 is about social norms, and this has been hinted at in a lot of my discussion so far. So people want to comply with or conform to injunctive or descriptive norms. Injunctive norms are about social expectations. What do other people expect me to do? Well, I'm going to want to comply with those social expectations. Descriptive norms are about what do people actually do. If I'm in, say, a new city and I'm not sure how to queue up for something, I'm going to see what other people do. That's a descriptive norm, and I'm going to conform to that. It's an important piece of information. Humans are social creatures, and we're naturally motivated to align our behaviors with these norms. Here's an example of my utility bill from October 2025. And I just want you to focus on the black bars for my electricity services. So it's the furthest right bar for October. What you can see is above my bar is a dashed line, which shows my neighborhood average, and the solid black line, which is the national average. Now for me, this kind of feedback is good because I'm competitive. I actually want to do better than my neighbors and better than other people when it comes to energy consumption. But this also establishes a bit of a descriptive norm. The descriptive norm is that other people are consuming more energy than I am. And if I want to conform to that descriptive norm, I should use more energy. At the very least, I can allow myself to consume more energy simply because other people are doing it. And so in some situations like this, descriptive norms can backfire. One way to really leverage descriptive norms is through using block leaders, so a community member who's a champion for a cause, who's really into a particular behavior. They can engage with their neighbors and say, hey, I do this behavior and in a growing community of your neighbors are doing this, you should join us. It would be a great way to demonstrate your commitment to the community, right? So block leaders can have this added normative influence, especially when they are trusted members of a community. Strategy 5 is using prompts, and these are simply reminders that are placed conspicuously or prominently at the point of behavioral decision. Ideally, they'll communicate clearly and quickly. It's just a quick reminder, right? I'll give some examples. So you're at the grocery checkout and you see this sign, remember to bring your reusable bag. It's simple, it's conspicuous, it's pretty good non-divisible end state behavior. What's wrong with this? Think about it for a second. Clearly, if you're reading the sign at the checkout, you've already committed yourself to either having brought your reusable bag or not, because your bag's probably at home. If it's in your hand, then you don't need the reminder, right? So this reminder isn't placed at the point of behavioral decision. A sign like this would be better on your door at home that you see on your way out. If you're going grocery shopping, you'll remember to bring a reusable bag. Here's another example. Please ensure you turn off the tap, save water, and save our environment. Conspicuous. I would say the language is quite simple. What's wrong with this? If you look closely, you'll see these are automatic taps. People don't make a decision to turn the tap off, right? It turns off on its own. I think a better prompt here would just be to say, wash your hands. That's the kind of thing that people have full behavioral control over. So these are a couple of examples of bad prompts, and I've actually seen prompts like this in washrooms, reminding me to turn off an automatic tap. Strategy 6 is social diffusion, and this is less of a strategy and more of just being aware of how new ideas spread through society. And this is articulated in what's called the diffusion of innovation theory, which has been around for a few decades. The idea is that when there's a new idea out there, it follows an adoption curve, starting with innovators. These are the people who are really into whatever the new idea is or new technology, right? Innovators. Then it goes to early adopters, early majority, late majority, and laggards. And the red curve shows the cumulative adoption rate. What's important from this theory is that it's been shown that the most influential people in terms of getting that adoption rate to increase are the early adopters. These are people who are certainly adopting a new idea or a good or service. They're adopting it relatively early, but they also have well-established social networks. And I'm not going to go into detail here, but there are ways of identifying which adopter category people are in. And there's a whole book on this concept called The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell. The idea is once you've passed a certain point in the adoption curve, the adoption rate skyrockets. That's the tipping point. Strategy 7 is communication. I'm not going to go into detail about the specifics of how to craft effective communication. That's kind of the topic of this entire class. But I do want to give some examples of where at least visual communication was used effectively in the context of social marketing. So here's one example of, what is this? It's not McDonald's. It looks like McDonald's. This is associating a familiar image with, in this case, the Dallas Farmers Market. It's about healthy foods, affordable prices, purchasing from local farmers. There are elements of social, environmental, and economic sustainability here by connecting perhaps an unknown idea, the farmer's market, with a very familiar image. Here's another example, a familiar idea of our hands, but associating it with an image of a monster. Because if you don't wash your hands, you might end up getting injured in the form of illness, right? So associating something very familiar, your hands, with something a little bit scary. And here's one more example from WWF, associating something quite familiar, brushing your teeth and your toothpaste, with environmental degradation. A lot of toothpaste uses palm oil. Palm oil is involved in deforestation quite frequently, habitat loss for animals, etc. A lot of consumer products have environmental costs, and you can use visual communication to connect that idea with audiences. And so these are just some examples of visual communication. Of course, communication isn't always visual. It often involves words, but there are lots of ways, lots of strategies within this broader strategy of communicating ideas effectively. Last thing I want to talk about, and this could go in a separate video, but it's one little point. I'm returning to this study that looked at 5 cases of water efficiency programs in Canada using community-based social marketing. And what they evaluated was to what extent those campaigns met 21 benchmark criteria. There were criteria related to behavior selection, identifying barriers and benefits, selecting a behavior, pilot testing, and evaluating broad-scale implementation. And what they found was that of the 5 case studies, just over half of the 21 benchmark criteria were met on average. Now this sounds not so good, but if you think about it, a campaign can deploy maybe 3 or 4 of the strategies and still be quite effective. So already you're losing a bunch of benchmarks by not using all 7 strategies. But something the 5 campaigns had in common is they were generally unable to assess the impacts of their campaigns. It was difficult. In this case, it's about having data of water efficiency, and it's expensive, or data are proprietary. There are a lot of reasons why these campaigners were unable to adequately assess if their campaigns were successful. Now, this is related to pilot testing and broad-scale implementation. If you remember from the first video, I wasn't going to talk about those in this lecture. But there are entire classes you can take on campaign evaluation to understand how to overcome limitations related to assessing if your campaign has been successful. So that's it for this lecture series on community-based social marketing. I hope you learned something new. Thanks for watching.